All right, Shalom. First and foremost, giving all praise, glory, and honor be to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakaha Kodash. Double honors to the beloved apostles and elders of Great Millstone, better known as GMS, who we well. Peace and salutations unto the hopeful elect, the tabernacle of David, beginning with the 144,000 and the rest of the men, women, and children, out of the 12 tribes, whom Yahweh Basham Shai will ultimately have mercy upon. And I'm your brother Matazabath, back at it again with the second part of going into the Spanish Inquisition and history of the so-called Mexicans and so-called Native Americans. And in part two, we're going to go and tap into Native Americans also being of the tribe of Gad, who are Israelites. All right. So if you didn't catch part one, go and watch it before you watch part two. And this is just following it up after tapping into the comment that this brother left me, asking to do a more in-depth lesson going into the history dealing with the Spanish Inquisition. All right. So now we're going to pick up dealing with the so-called Native Americans. Right. And I have here a very good website, which I'll leave in the description box for you, brethren. You can use this for edification to bring out, key points. Again, take the meat from the bone when going through this information. But this is a powerful website, and this is entitled Archaic Migrations to North America. All right, because you have this this narrative that, the Native Americans, even though they've always been here, they're really, Eskimos and Serbians, and they come from this and Iberia, and they do this, and they're not really the people. They've been here for over 30 to 50,000 years, and it's just a bunch of nonsense, man. All right. This is why you have to stick to the scriptures. So before we do that, let's go to Genesis, the 49th chapter. We're going to deal with Gad in the 19th verse, which is an end time prophecy. All right. It says, Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Right. Now, the word Gad actually means troop. All right. And it refers to the so-called North American Indians today. Now, when you go into the history, the Gadites, they were actually overcome by the U.S. cavalry. All right. But in the end, it says that he shall overcome. Right. Meaning the elect of Gad will overcome in the last days as they are awakening to the truth. All right. And if you've been watching and haven't been living under a rock, you will see that a lot of so-called Native Americans are actually rising up against Esau. Recently, a few months ago, there was a lot of Gadites in New York City that were, pretty much marching on their horses and stuff like that, standing up. All right. And then there's other protests that were going on across the country dealing with our brethren. All right. So also, when you look up the Indian Wars, whereas Esau, the U.S. government made all the treaties with Gad, but ended up breaking it was estimated about 500 or so or more of those treaties. When you go into the history, they've been violated and broken by the U.S. government, man. All right. And there's movies, too, when you deal with Gad. The recent one that everybody loved was the one that came out recently with Michael B. Jordan, the movie entitled Sinners. All right. When they were chasing those vampires. All right. The Gadites. But nevertheless, so here we have the archaic migrations to North America. And we're going to go to the bulletin here where it says Shemitic Indians in Mexico. I want to click on that, and we're going to have a quick read through this. It says when the Spaniards, because remember, we're still dealing with the Spanish Inquisition. All right. Because it wasn't just the so-called Mexicans. The Gad got in it, too, as well. All right. Remember, let's get this precept real quick. All right. Because remember, we have to deal with prophecy. This is Jeremiah 50 and 33. All right. And it says, thus saith Yahweh of hosts, the children of Israel, the northern kingdom, and the children of Judah, which represents the southern kingdom, were oppressed together. And all that took them captives held them fast, and they refused to let them go. Now, you got to remember, during the time when Jeremiah wrote this, The northern kingdom wasn't really around the Babylonian Empire because they had left the Assyrian Empire and they went over to the Americas. So what was Jeremiah essentially saying here? This was a future prophecy. All right. When both by the time the southern kingdom came over around the 1600s, both Judah and Ephraim were oppressed together. Ephraim represents the northern kingdom, which is just another name synonymous with the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. Right. So you have to understand the history and learn how to link it with prophecy. Right. So let's read this. It says, when the Spaniards came to Mexico and were standing guard on cold nights, they began to wonder who these Indians really were. Some of those soldiers, Bernal Diaz among them, advanced the idea that these Indians might be Jews. Now, why would they think that? Why on earth would they think that? Because remember, when you look up Cristobal Colon, that's his real name, but you know him today being taught in your school system as Christopher Columbus. Remember when he set voyage to go to the Americas, Salakia, not the Americans, but the Americas. All right. He took with him an interpreter who knew Hebrew. Why? Because he read the prophecy in Second Esdras, the 13th chapter, that the northern kingdom would travel to what's known as Arsareth, which means another land. And that another land was referring to the Americas. All right. And I've already done lessons on that. You can look up that video if you want more information on it. But it says, among the Spaniards, Estimadorans in particular have been raised on Roman history, and they knew about the reigns of the Roman emperors Vespasian and his son Titus. And both Vespasian and Titus have been governors of Judea, and after suppressing the Judean rebellion around 70 CE, they sent whole tribes of Jews into exile. And you can also find that in the book From Babylon to Timbuktu on page 64, I believe, where it talks about after the outages and the atrocities that the Roman Empire made towards the Judeans, that it was estimated to be about 1 million so-called black Judeans that went into slavery. All right. And you can look up that information. That's secular history. That's not a fable. Anyway, it says the Spaniards wondered if perhaps the Indians were not descended from those ancient Jews who were exiled from Palestine more than 1400 years before. Now, you got to understand something. Yes, the northern kingdom, they had already left to go to the Assyrian Empire. However, you did have remnants of the northern kingdom that stayed back. Because the proof of that, when you get Luke, I believe it's the 2nd chapter, all right, where it talks about you had a woman from the tribe of Asher that was on the scene during the time of the Messiah. So you had little remnants of the northern kingdom, but for the majority of it, the bulk of the northern kingdom, they had already went to the Americas. OK, you got to keep that in mind. And that was during the time after the Assyrian Empire. All right. So but how? They asked themselves, would the Jews have got here? All right. Now, I want you to keep that in mind because they asked the question, how would the Jews have gotten here? And we're going to go into the prophecy in 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter. And then we also are going to get this video evidence of a so-called Native American elderly woman. And she's going to tell you the story and the history that her father told her. All right. So coming back here. All right. Because what I like to do is I like to give you secular history, back it up with prophecy, precepts, and then give you historical, whether it be a video evidence or whatever the case may be. Right. That's usually how I like to do my lessons. So it says, well, the Jews knew how to build ships and it would have been possible to sail across the Mediterranean. Keep this information in mind. All right. Because she is going to tell you. All right. The same thing that they are confirming to what actually really happened. It says through the Strait of Gibraltar, then across the ocean, wouldn't it? Furthermore, several of the Spaniards came up with an odd fact to support this theory. Indian priests in Zempoala had shown them how the obsidian knives, the sacrificial knives, were also used for circumcision. which was known to be a Judean rite. And the reason why I'm saying the word Judean is because I don't want to say that J word there. All right. Because, they seem to be the hot topic right now. And if you say anything in regards to them, you'll be hit with the anti word, if you know what I mean. So it says, ergo, these Indians might be Jews. Dr. Phil traced many of these fleeing Jews to present day Tennessee. All right. Because the natives, they wasn't just in South America. They were also in Central America. OK, don't forget, you also had the tribe of Reuben, Ra'awaban, OK, which is today your Seminole Indians. All right. Look up the Trail of Tears. All right. How they now reside in Oklahoma, I believe it is, with their reservations. All right. Anyway, it says Antonio, a Moreno secret Jew, while journeying in South America in 1641. OK, had an Indian guide who greeted him with the Shema Israel, hear, O Israel. Now, how would Indian that greeted him know the Shema if they are not the Israelites? How would he have known that? You have to ask yourself these questions, right? It says, furthermore, the guide reported that many people of the same origin, meaning many of the other Native Americans, were living in the highlands near Quito, Ecuador. He also claimed that he met savages who followed Judean practices. See that? This story, Antonio repeated in Holland in 1644. The Manasseh ben Israel, who printed it in his work, Hope of Israel, in 1650. So now, which, by the way, I actually have that PDF. Or did I have it? Yep. So this is from brandeis.edu, and I'm going to just hit straight to the point. Right here, it says The Hope of Israel, 1650, Manasseh ben Israel's best known work, published in Spanish and Latin and eventually translated into English, Dutch, Yiddish, Hebrew, focuses on the coming of the Messiah as it relates to the discovery of the New World and the origins of the American Indians. The preface to the courteous reader explains both the book's title and objectives. Let's come up here to the top. And it reads, I prove that the 10 tribes never returned to the second temple, that they yet keep the laws of Moses and our sacred rites, and at last shall return to their land with the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and shall be governed by one prince who is the Messiah, the son of David, and without doubt, that time is near. I willingly leave it to the judgment of godly and learned what happy worth there is in this my book and what my own nation owes me for my pains. It is called the Hope of Israel, which name is taken from Jeremiah 14:8. Oh, the hope of Israel, the Savior thereof. For the scope of this discourse is to show that the hope in which we live of the coming of the Messiah is of a future difficult but infallible good, because it is grounded upon the absolute promise of the blessed power. So let me see here. This is what he said also. Like many Christians of his day, Manasseh ben Israel insisted that the Indians found in the New World descended from Adam and Eve and were survivors of the flood, which that doesn't make any sense when you say it like that. Now, yes, they come from Adam and Eve through which of the sons? Through Shem, because the chosen seed was traced through Shem, not Ham or Japheth. All right. And no, they would not have been survivors of the flood. All right. Because, again, you only had Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which the sons of God descended from Shem. All right. Because when you get Genesis, the 9th chapter, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he was known as the God of Shem. All right. That's in Genesis, the 9th chapter. Anyway, it says the alternative that they descended from a separate act of creation not described in the Bible was to him theologically palatable. He also concurred with those who, based on the apocryphal book of 2nd Esdras, insisted that the lost 10 tribes had scattered to the 4 corners of the earth, since he argued, based on Isaiah, that the gathering together of the captivity shall begin in America. This is why you always have the apostles, starting with an elder apostle Tahar, always says a majority of his lessons that the main focus of the truth is centered here in America. Why? Because the bulk of the 12 tribes resides in America. This is where the greatest exodus is going to happen on the planet Earth, because America is going to be destroyed by thermonuclear fire. So going on, it says he put forth a conclusion that offered Jews and Christians alike both solace and hope. All right. So that's all we need on that. I just wanted to bring out that point about the Indians. So now let's turn our attention and come back over here. So we left off there. It says early in the 19th century, a young member of parliament, Edward King, Viscount Kingsborough, was struck by the beauty and mystery of a Mexican Indian codex or manuscript in the Bodleian Library that arrived at Oxford. He exhausted his fortune and perhaps his life in attempting to prove that the lost tribes of Israel were ancestors of the Indians of Mexico, and nearly half of Adar's book was reprinted by the passionately convinced Kingsborough. He sank the bulk of his fortune into the publication of 9 magnificent volumes of Mexican codices with commentary entitled Antiquities of Mexico. All right. And it just goes into how he was trying to put his efforts into publishing a book. But when you drop down here, it says this appears to be associated more with the Aztecs than with Maya. All right. The Aztecan language itself has been shown to have many Hebraic Shemitic roots and can be traced to the northwest Palestine, where parts of the Israelite tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, and Issachar settled. So they're essentially what they're saying in that book, which is very hard to grab a copy of that book, but you can't find it. They're saying that those natives, those indigenous, when you trace their language, it actually goes back to the Lashon Kodash, the Hebraic Shemitic roots. OK. And this is secular history. But see, to the brother's point, because he said you got people that believe that the Mexicans, and they also sometimes will throw the Native Americans in there, that they can't be the Israelites because of their features, when you're not supposed to judge based off appearance, man. All right. What does the prophecy say? Now, let's take you. So that's that. All right. That's some information I wanted to bring out, dealing with the Indian that guided the Moreno Jew with the Shammai. OK, how else would he have known that? So now let's turn our attention and let's deal with prophecy. Let's go to 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter. And we're going to start at the 40th verse. And it says, I'll start at verse 39. It says, and whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes, which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king, who Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they passed over. Now, if you remember in part 1, towards the end of my lesson, I had an Issacharite brother that explained to you that Issachar was gifted with the ability to be able to understand the times by looking up at the stars and using that as a guide to navigate through the waters. That's how they were able to come across the Americas, right? With the help of Yahweh, obviously holding back the, the flow, the stream and stuff to help the tribes get over there, because what? Prophecy at the end of the day had to be fulfilled. All right. Jeremiah 50 and 33, Israel and Judah were pressed together. It says, for through that country, there was a great way to go, namely a year and a half in the same region as called Arsareth. All right. Now, we always do this when you look up Arsareth. All right. When you look up Arsareth, Now, let's see what they say here. I never really looked this up like this. It says Arsarith America isn't a commonly used phrase or term. It sounds like a combination of two unrelated words. Arsarith is not a known word or name, while America refers to the United States of America. Here we go. Let's get the one in the Jewish Encyclopedia. See what they say. It says the name, Salakia, the name of the land beyond the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of restoration, according to Second Esdras. Columbus identified America with this land. Okay, and this is the definition of Arsarith. He identified America with this land. Okay. Now, if you look up on YouTube, let's go to YouTube real quick, and I'm doing this on the fly. 1492, Columbus quotes Second Esdras. All right, now this is fair use. All right, I'm going to play this. This is fair use.
Why did you wish to sail west?
To open a new route to Asia. Asia is the richest kingdom, the land of spices and gold. At the moment, there are only two ways of reaching it. By sea, sailing around the African continent. The journey takes a year. Or by land. But the Turks have closed this route to all Christians. There is a third way. By sailing west across the ocean sea.
The distance is unknown. It's said to be infinite.
Superstition. I believe the Indies are no more than 750 leagues west of the Canary Islands.
How can you be so certain?
The calculations of Toscanelli, Marin de Tir, Esdras.
Esdras is a Jew.
So what's worse?
2 minutes, and already you're a dead man.
For telling the truth?
Yes. We are burning people for less. The man you're about.
All right, so this is a Hollywood movie, and they put it in Hollywood to show you. But see, Jake can't read between the lines, man. All right, and in the Jewish Encyclopedia, okay, from the people that's over in the land claiming to be us, they even say that, yeah, this is synonymous with Columbus identifying America with this land. And this is in the Apocrypha. This is one of the many reasons why they took the Apocrypha out of the Bible, along with others like the true identity of who the so-called white man is today being that of the Edomite. All right. So now let's come over to this video testimony of this elderly Native American woman. Let's see what she has to say.
And the argument is always, well, you know, the white people brought us Christianity. It is not, well, they brought it later, but we as Native Americans and my people as the Dene people, they walked and talked with Christ long before the pilgrims came. They knew him, and he walked around among them. When you think about the drawing on, that these men had, and then think about what my grandfather and the 12 men spoke about, and they, you know, my grandfather said that they built a ship and they came across the great waters, and it was tumultuous, and they came here to this land. They were in the east, and there was millions, eventually, of millions and millions of Native Americans that were, you know, that were just covered this land.
You see what she said? That they traveled from the east and they built ships. Now, remember, if we come back here, because the Spaniards, they first asked, this second paragraph right here, the Spaniards wondered if perhaps these Indians were not descended from those ancient Jews who were exiled from Palestine more than 1,400 years before. But how, they asked themselves, would the Jews have got here? Well, the Jews knew how to build ships, and it would have been possible to sail across the Mediterranean. And she just said that her grandfather passed the story down that they actually built ships over in the east, and they set sail to the west, right? And then when you read the Apocrypha, all right, they took it upon themselves to leave and go to a further country, right? And they enter into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. So essentially what I'm saying to the young brother who asked me the question is, you got to learn how to connect the dots. And if the spirit is dealing with you, it's going to show you everything in real time through the spirit. But see, our people, they can't connect the dots. They're too carnal. No, that can't be. They not the Israelites. But what does prophecy say? You see what I mean? So, yeah, there's really nothing else I can go into, but I'm going to bring out just a couple of precepts and then I'll close out. All right. It's Hosea 4:6. It says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. That thou should be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of power, I will also forget thy children, man. And our people are truly destroyed for lack of knowledge. All they know is that, I'm an Israelite, or they'll say the Israelites are only the so-called black people. All 12 tribes were black. Not understanding that all 12 tribes are scattered and you're going to have Israelites looking like the heathen nations. All right. That's why John the Revelator said this. Let's get that. Revelation 7. Okay. And 9, after this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with the white robes and palms in their hands. And we always go into this because remember, Israel was scattered into all of these nations. So when you go into the Hebrew word, which is, not Hebrew word, but when you go into the Greek word phule, which is the English translation to kindreds, is speaking of a tribe, or in the New Testament, all the persons descending from one of the 12 sons of the patriarch of Jacob. So the great multitude is speaking of all the Israelites that are scattered amongst all the nations. And when you drop down to verse 13, and one of the elders answered, saying unto me, what are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? Because he saw the vision. All of these Israelites, they don't all look like Wesley Snipes. They're not all of a dark hue color. They're going to vary and range from different shades of brown, from the darkest brown to the lightest. Right. But obviously, we know when we get those bodies, we're going to have our full dark hue color in the kingdom. But when all of these Israelites are getting beamed up in the chariots, all right, you're going to see Israelites. All right. You're going to be taken back, and it's going to be astounding to you because you're going to be like, nah, that can't be. They are Israelites. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said in part 1, you can't judge a book by its cover, man. And a lot of you jakes out here that believe in that whole all 12 tribes are black, you're going to be confounded in that day. You're going to be confounded. Verse 14, and I said unto him, sir, thou knowest. And he said unto me, these are they which came out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And you can follow this up also with 2nd Esdras, the 2nd chapter. All right. Because it goes, Esdras speaks more on this, of what John the Revelator saw. OK. So, let's also get 2 Peter 2:15. It says, study to show thyself approved unto the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, a workman that needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. All right. You have to study. OK, you can't just go and just because somebody tells you that, our people go off looks. That's why they say the Mexicans are not Israelites. Well, the Mexicans are Israelites. And when we say Mexicans, we're speaking of those of the indigenous descent. Because even the ones who once had a dark hue color, they've intermingled with the heathen women, and now they bore children. And guess what? Those children would have came out with a lighter hue complexion that does not separate, going back to the seed of their father, that, all of a sudden they're not Israelites because they're too light. They're too light in color. That makes no sense. And for you to say that, and I'm not speaking of you in particular, but for any individual to say that, you are carnal, you're not spiritual. You know, and it's not meant for our people to get it, you know. But so, you know, anyway, that's pretty much the point of the matter. All right. I just wanted to back up and give you some information dealing with the Spanish Inquisition and to show you evident proof on how secular history links up to biblical prophecy or what would happen, you know, to those particular tribes, be that of Issachar and also Gad, which we touched in during this lesson. All right. And any other brethren, you know, that want to add more history. All right. Because I just tried to, you know, get straight to the point. Feel free. You know, you can do a land back off my video if you got any more points to bring out. And if you want to tag the brother, you know, you can tag the brother. But hopefully the point has been made. And I pray that you were edified on both parts, part 1 and part 2. So let's close out. And I want to give all praise, glory, and honor be to Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the beloved apostles and elders of Great Millstone, better known as GMS, who rule well. Peace and salutation unto the hopeful elect, the tabernacle of David. It's on to the next, Lord's will. Shalom.